Well, there are no documents. Not one single page of German wartime documents talks about gas chambers or killing people with gas. And there are people who say, but Irving, you don't expect to find any documents. The Nazis will have destroyed everything in the last weeks of the war. Well, somebody who says that is unfamiliar with the kind of chaos that exists even now in the German archives. If you go to the National Archives in Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington and see the captured German records there, they're still in disarray. The Germans, in the final weeks of chaos, would not have had time to meticulously go through every single file and folder and document, removing every document because even if every carbon copy at Hitler's headquarters had been preserved and saved and rescued from Hitler's headquarters in Poland before the Russians arrived there, the person at the receiving end of those orders would have received it too through the teleprinter, and he would have made copies. And even if every copy of that had been destroyed, there's always some Feldfebel, some corporal who writes a private diary, or who writes a letter home to Mummy in which he describes what they did that day. And those documents have turned up now in profusion, but there's nowhere in the private diaries or private letters of the Germans during those years not a single reference explicitly to killing people in gas chambers. There's lots of references to ugly things being done to the Jews, but the gas chambers just don't survive in the archives. This I find significant, because I've worked in the archives and I know what to expect and what not to expect. And I would expect to have found that by now, 50 years after. And about 20 years ago, with a $1,000 bundle of notes and come up with one single wartime document. I did it to Deborah Lipstadt in Atlanta a few weeks ago, who was my arch enemy here in the United States. I stood up at the back of her audience where she had delivered a speech in which she had made mincemeat of me, not knowing I was sitting in the back row. And I said, you've quoted this, and you've said you've obtained blueprints and documents of gas chambers from the Moscow archives. Here's $1,000, Mrs. Lipstadt, if you can show the audience now that blueprint you just talked about. Because you can't. You know you've lied. They've lied. And she eventually called the police to have me thrown out of the meeting. That's the only way they operate. Fully, people will say, not the proof that the documents didn't exist. The Germans managed to destroy every single document. They couldn't have destroyed the documents that we British had. Now, you won't know this, but 1942 and 1943, the middle years of the war, we British had developed a computer which was reading the German codes. And in those 2 years, 1942 and 1943, we had developed that computer to break the codes of Himmler and the SS. And in particular, we were reading every day the messages of the concentration camp commandants of the 7 biggest concentration camps, including Dachau and Buchenwald and Auschwitz. And what do these signals say that Auschwitz is sending back to Berlin every day, that we were reading without the Germans knowing it? Remember, they're sending this in their top secret code, so they're not concealing anything. They're sending it in their own secret code, and they have no reason to believe that we British have a computer, which didn't exist in those days, but we built the first ever computer in the world. It was as big as a house. And we were breaking the German codes with it. And the SS codes, the commandant of Auschwitz, a man called Rudolf Höss, was reporting back to Berlin every day what he was doing in his camp. And he was giving statistics, 4 figures every day. The numbers of prisoners who had arrived during the previous 24 hours ending at midnight. The number of prisoners, or slave laborers, if you will, who had left the camp during the previous 24 hours. The numbers of prisoners who were on hand at midnight, the total in the camp at Auschwitz. And the 4th figure was losses, Abgänger, which was correctly interpreted by British intelligence as meaning the number of prisoners who had died during the previous 24 hours in Auschwitz. A minuscule figure, which was again broken down into 3 categories. The number of prisoners who had died from epidemics and illness, the numbers of prisoners who had died from shooting, and the number of prisoners who had died from hanging. The British official historian, Professor Sir Frank Hinsley, the master of St. John's College in Cambridge University now, and the British Secret Service, who revealed